welcome back for another week of blockchain gaming news with me, Jenny Jordan, and my co-host, John Jordan. Hi, John. How are you?
Yep, raring to go as ever.
Good. Yeah, I can tell. It's Friday, 3rd of October. You said this is going to be a waffly one, so you got loads on your heart. I can just tell. So first off, let's talk about the biggest news, I suppose, of the week with SANDchain coming out of the Sandbox. So what's that all about?
Yeah, so the reason it's going to be not even more waffly than normal is that there is sort of news, but there's sort of, particularly in the case of this SANDchain thing, there's sort of an announcement about it, which gives you sort of a flavour of where they're going with it, but it's obviously quite early, and it's one of these very blockchain projects that are, I'm not saying they promise the world, but it's sort of a little bit like, we could do all these things, and we know with all these projects that they'll either sort of do nothing or they'll do like a small subset of the potential thing, at least at the start. Anyway, so yes, the SANDchain, as it suggests, is sort of come from the Sandbox, but equally it's sort of isn't as well. So obviously the Sand token has been around for a long time, and that's always been tied to the Sandbox. And the Sandbox, as it started out, was sort of, I used to call it my first metaverse, or Roblox on blockchain. So, a place where people would build little game experiences, and gamers would come and play them, and maybe they'd get rewards for playing them on NFTs and stuff, or maybe if it was a big branded thing, they'd pay to enter, this big sort of amazing sort of thing. That was the sort of idea back in the day, and that idea has just sort of been diluted over time for various reasons, sort of crypto sentiment, and the fact that it's taken them too long to actually build anything, and it's not just their fault, but other sort of things have happened over sort of many years. So they did announce a couple of weeks ago, or it sort of leaked out that there's going to be there's this restructuring happening. So they've restructured the Sandbox company and got rid of some people because they were overstaffed. And then there was a sort of very garbled thing that they were going to launch a sort of token launch pad, and there was some truth in that. That is part of sort of SANDchain, but it's a sort of small part of it. So anyway, and the other thing is, as with everything blockchain, the SANDchain it's its own separate L2 blockchain designed for creators, and the Sandbox will be sort of the launch partner of that. It's very unclear if any, how many other projects will be using SANDchain. But I think one of the ideas of SANDchain is that it is related but separate to Sandbox, so other people could be using it. And when you sort of dig into
the most surprising thing is that I think when you think of SANDchain coming out of the Sandbox, it's obviously going to be for the Sandbox creators, but it's actually not. So that's sort of.
Well, yeah. I mean, so certainly when they first launched it, my first impression was like, oh, they're ditching Polygon and they're going to move everything over, because that's what people are doing at the moment, running their own sort of infrastructure. They think that sort of makes sense. But that's not the case at all. So they've not said this explicitly, but all the assets, like the land's on Ethereum, the tokens on Ethereum and Polygon, most of the assets are on Polygon. I don't think that's not changing at all. At least that's not even been sort of rumored. But the SANDchain is basically a totally separate way of creators to monetize their audiences. So obviously that would sort of work at a top level. That would work in the Sandbox if there were creators there making little experiences that were getting tons of plays, but I mean, there's not. There's nothing going on there from UGC point of view, unfortunately. But anyway, so the Sand, one of the interesting things about it, and this is just this is not particularly to the SANDchain, this is something that any blockchain can do, I suppose, is what they want to do is they want to get creative people. And the first sort of time they mentioned it was like, oh, you can connect your like YouTube account and your TikTok account. Quite how you do that, I guess you just sort of log in through it. People maybe don't want to do that, but whatever. So anyway, people will log in with these Web2 social creator platform accounts, and that will let the SANDchain, obviously see how popular your content is on these other platforms. But equally, it will also let you see how much you're monetizing those platforms. And because they're sort of building this, really, it's a sort of payment sort of platform that will allow you to do things like potentially take a loan out. So I don't know. This is totally hypothetical on my part. But say you wanted to spend $1,000 buying better cameras for your YouTube channel or something like that. That's a typical thing people creators sort of say. It seems like the Sand chain will allow people of a high enough rating to go, yeah, you can borrow $1,000 because we know you make $5,000 a year, and obviously there'd have to be some sort of legal agreement about how you paid it back. But this is like adding an extra sort of investment DeFi yield thing almost for people at the moment holding Sand token. Sand token is just purely a meme at the moment, like no one's using it for anything functional. So this would bring this sort of DeFi functionality for the Sand. So Sand holders could put their Sand into some sort of vault treasury system and then be earning yield on it because people are borrowing from that. Sand and USDC actually. So you can sort of see there's a little interesting thing there. But obviously the interesting thing is that's happening not in the Sandbox, the game. That's happening in these other platforms. And then in one of the quotes, they really expand it, and instead of just going YouTube and TikTok, they're like YouTube, TikTok, I'll probably miss some out, Instagram, Discord, which is interesting because I don't think you can monetize Discord as a sort of like a individual anyway. Apple App Store, Google Play Store, Fortnite, Roblox. So, that seems like a big stretch goal that people, like game developers, are going to be going to the SANDchain and plugging in their App Store, accounts, which is obviously, I'm sure there's safe ways of doing it, but and letting people see how much money they're making through the App Store and then being able to sort of somehow borrow that seems a bit weird. The reason they potentially some people may do it is obviously some people who are making games in the Sandbox may be developers who are doing App Store type games as well, and Fortnite and Roblox. So there may be some crossover there that may be sort of more helpful. The other thing comes back to this token launchpad. So again, if you sort of are accredited as a creator in some way, they will let you launch your own token, and that will obviously be backed against Sand. So that's good, obviously, for Sand because it's giving utility to the Sand token. You need to have Sand token will need to be backed. That'll be the pair. If I launch John Coin, it'll be your trade John Coin versus Sand. I mean that's the point of it. And so again, that sort of seems to make sense if the Sandbox was this really big dynamic sort of environment where people were having loads of having loads of followers and that sort of thing, and they sort of needed a way to monetize that. At the moment, it just seems a little bit like here's a launchpad, which launchpads, if they work, incredibly successful in terms of meme coins and that sort of stuff, and everyone's sort of doing this, like YGG are now doing a token launchpad for their DGeN casual DGeN games. So it's a very big trend in blockchain. But it feels to me a little bit like the Sandbox has sort of taken these things that are in vogue at the moment, sort of a grab bag, a smorgasbord, as you would say, a smorgasbord of sort of cool blockchain things, and sort of whack them all in together. And it clearly could work, because assuming the blockchain, on the technical side, it's not super difficult, I don't think, to build that sort of stuff. But the problem is, how do you ever get people into it? And that's the biggest problem for any, not just blockchain product, but any product at the moment is sort of the attention community. How do you get people to use your service? And obviously they would say, well, the Sandbox is really popular, and that. But we know from a UGC point of view, the Sandbox isn't really popular. The bit of the Sandbox that's popular is the current series, Alpha Series 6, which is has these big, not massive brands, but Circus du Soleil and people like that. So there's I'm not saying it won't work. I think it's a really interesting concept. And it's good to see the Sandbox being dynamic and thinking a little bit outside the Sandbox box, so to speak. But it's still, there's a big, as ever, you have the ideas, but the implementation and how they implement that. Obviously, they can incentivize people with Sand token. They've been doing that to a degree for their alpha seasons. But it's, for me, who's, I wouldn't say I'm the target audience, but I'm quite interested in the Sandbox, and I have a tiny YouTube channel that makes about $100 a year. I mean, I don't think this is going to take me, I don't think this is really going to take me to the next sort of level of building a community there. So, so it's sort of like, do they have a community that you can tap into? Not really. The people who have communities, do they want to plug that into the Sandbox? Probably not really. So, we'll have to sort of see how it pans out.
Okay, good. Moving on to mythical games and Pudgy Penguins game, Pudgy Party, which hit 1 million last week, I think, but the news came out this week. Mobile game launched via app stores a month-ish ago, because they did reach this within a month of launching.
Yeah.
And this coincided with the Mythos chain also seeing an all-time high. So whether that's down to Pudgy Party or not, I mean, they've always got NFL rivals and FIFA rivals. Also, I think they've just released some quite big expansions for FIFA rivals, some updates. So that's also going. But is it mainly? Do you think it's mainly Pudgy Party that contributes to the Mythos activity? When you download the game and start create an account, you automatically have a wallet created for you in the background, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of it's a little bit of sort of causation correlation going on there. So obviously a blockchain, you know, any blockchain will just have sort of, they're not random, but it just has transactions going on, people doing stuff. Depends on what their blockchain is a little bit. If it's a DeFi thing, they'll be doing DeFi things. I mean, Mythos chain is a gaming chain, but if you look at what's happening, if you look at the activity on the Mythos chain this year, you wouldn't go, you wouldn't, up to this point, you wouldn't have said, oh, this went up here because a game launched, and this went down here because it was the American football season was off, and so NFL rivals activity went down. There's no obvious correlation like that. It's people just doing sort of stuff. And the biggest thing on the Mythos chain is their D market, which is a tokenized version of CS:GO skin. So that's just sort of randomly doing its high volume over whatever the trend there is. The reason I guess it is a little bit interesting is actually into sort of the summer, the general activity on the Mythos chain was actually quite low. So even though it has NFL rivals and FIFA rivals sort of launched in June, I think, you couldn't really see, here's a big pickup from all the FIFA rivals people playing. I mean, there just wasn't. It was actually still going down. So I guess the interesting thing is that Pudgy Party, as you say, it's done 1 million downloads, which is amazing. But it's the fastest game that Mythical Games has had. Given that everyone who downloads and plays a game from Mythical Games has a Mythos wallet created for them in the background, you sort of would, sort of all other things considered, expect to see something going on there if you have 1 million wallets created in a month. And generally, the sort of Mythos chain's all-time high previously was about 110,000 daily active unique wallets. So it's not a massive amount of stuff. So you would expect to see something, and you do see basically it sort of hit a sort of a low in the sort of the summer into the autumn, and then from roughly the time the Pudgy Party is launched, it just sort of goes. It's not like a rocket ship. It doesn't 10x its previous all-time high. It just beats it by a few thousand. So I think there is more. There is a causation there as well. Of course, the other sort of thing is the myth token is at an all-time low. So sort of go figure on that, and that's obviously due to speculation and stuff. But you sort of think to a degree.
Token prices and everything. Is it?
Well, no, but it's just one other thing, and you sort of think, it does point a signal to whether sort of KGeN type, speculators think this token's going to keep going up. I mean, that's all, And if you think, Pudgy Penguins is one of the biggest NFT collections at the moment, doing really well, and the game comes out and seems to be doing reasonably well, you would think people would go, oh yeah, I'll buy some of this myth. But, that's not happening. Yeah, it's not happened at all, and but it's still, I think the other thing with Mythical is it's very much about sort of layering these games on. So at the start of the year they had sort of one game, and now they've got 3 games, and they got Blancos, which love that to be a massive hit. I don't think it will be, but that's going to come out this year, next year, and they've got other games that are coming. So for them, it's sort of like we're just layering these things up, and not all of them are. They may not be the sort of best sports games in that genre ever, but all of them are sort of fairly high quality games as games, blockchain all in the background. So you just that approach, sort of steady but sort of high quality, is obviously very different from most of the other blockchain games, which is sort of make a big splash, how you're going to make tons of money, and then sort of fall over at the first fall at the first fence.
I would say they're the closest to seamless Web3 integration into their games that any developer publisher has sort of been. Everyone's talking about it, but there's still a lot of clunky games out there. But here, you actually don't really notice the blockchain elements interrupting sort of the game at all. Right, we're gonna look at the Indian Gaming Guild KGeN or Kratos Network, it used to be called. Have they rebranded to KGeN or?
Well, I think the Kratos Network was sort of what they came out with as a sort of corporate names. I think probably the company is still called that corporately, but they go KGeN is sort of their brand that they don't talk about Kratos anymore.
I mean, India is kind of interesting for Web3 at the moment. Anyway, so Kratos or KGeN is announced this week. It's raised 13.5 million, quite a substantial chunk in the current sort of investment climate. It's raised a total of 43 million now, I think, isn't it? But so why is this sort of interesting? Why is India? Why is it the Indian kind of Web3 gaming market interesting?
Yeah. Well, I would say the Indian thing is actually the less interesting bit of it. So historically, they are based in India. Most of the founders are Indian. They basically originally took over the Indie GG Indian sub-DAO from YGG. They bought that out 2023, I think. But it's always been there. Even though they have done a lot of work in India, their sort of narrative over the last year or so has been very much broader than that. So they sort of now say sort of Southeast Asia and Latin America has been a big focus for them. Sort of MENA, I think, Nigeria, places like that. So they're obviously sort of taking that sort of guild. They wouldn't use the term guild, but sort of the blueprint that YGG sort of came out with and has now gone miles off with its DGen. I don't know how much YGG focuses on that scholarship model. I think that's probably gone now, pretty much. It sort of leaves KGeN standing, sort of interestingly. So, and they're very, in some ways, they're sort of consumer messaging is very DGen. I mean, very, very DGen, sort of quite off-puttingly DGen to some degree. But in other ways, sort of, you read their white papers and stuff, and generally they position themselves as a very transparent, open sort of company, which is interesting. Like they put financials on their website, which I assume are true, but there's no reason for me to think they're not true. But most companies that are not public don't put their their monthly financials public. And they've had this thing that they basically have 5 pillars. I won't go into all, but they basically, if you're a member, if you're using their sort of apps, they basically they're building a reputation system. So very much a bit like very much like Mocha Network or Mochaverse, and their air system that they're trying to build. And obviously in blockchains, that's in some ways very easy. But obviously you need to have structure around that. So you can't just choose the blockchain because people just make wallets and you can manipulate that. But anyway, so KGeN is, like I wrote in my Substack, have they solved Web3 rewards? I don't know if they have or not, but their basis is they basically work out sort of who you are, and they can do that through stuff like KYC, obviously. They work out how much you engage with games. So they're moving a bit away from gaming in their messaging, but I think basically everything they do is gaming. So looking at how much you engage with games, what you're playing, what sort of stuff you're playing, how much you're spending. And that's the interesting bit, because most of the people they will be having, and they've had like 66 million people in the last month, wallets in the last month. Most of those people will be the typical extractive play to earn people from developing countries who want to make another couple of dollars, a week.
Bots.
Bots as well, yeah, of course. But so it's how much. But so they're looking to how much you're spending. So obviously, they have their own internal sort of currency. So they could be giving. You can give that away and then see what people do with it. A bit also like Pixels is doing. To see what people are doing with it. If you give people money and they just cash it out, then you don't give them any more. If you give people money and they spend it in games, and you give them more and see, build your cohorts that way. So they have another one like a networking. So how are you networking within other people in their KGeN sort of network? And they have like sort of guild systems and all that sort of stuff as well. I can't remember what the other one is anyway, but there's 5 of them. And supposedly that gives everyone a score. So everyone has a score based on these different sort of aspects of how you would interact with games. And then they go to often games companies. That's how it started out, and obviously they can pump people into games to get people playing in games. I think at the moment that I will say the investment is the reason I want to talk about this is not so much what they're doing as a company, but as you say, it is a big chunk, and we haven't seen that many big chunks of investment. And it's also proper grown up non-blockchain crypto investors. So it's XL who had already invested in their first seed round. Prosus, who had already invested in the first seed round, who are a massive, big investment sort of consumer company. And can I remember the other one? I can't. That's embarrassing. Anyway, maybe come to me. But these are not people who invest in into blockchain games. They're people who sort of look more widely. So it's interesting, and obviously for two of those people to have already invested like 2 years ago, that means they've got a good feeling about what's going on there. So that's that's a sort of a marker. Not to say all those investors are right. I mean, they're wrong most of the time. They lose more times than they win. But it's when you get people repeat investing, that sort of shows a mark of sort of a reputation when we're happy with where this stuff's going. The one interesting kind of thing was that all the previous two funding rounds they've given out which I think is a bad form, but anyway, the first one they said, we've raised 10 million at 150 million valuation, so KGeN then was on this VC round worth 150 million, and then the next round they said, we're worth 500 million. Obviously that was a bit more in the boom times. They've not said that this time. The reason you don't say that is clearly you're not raising that money at 500 million again, because it's a down round, but that's how sentiment is in blockchain. You wouldn't expect it to be an up round. So we don't know the valuation of that, but it's and they said that sort of at the moment they've made $1 million profit this year or annualized, which is a bit of a made up accounting term, but they're sort of saying they're profitable. So if you're profitable but not sort of too profitable, but growing, so you can have a sort of a bigger valuation. Investors sort of like to see growth at the early stages rather than profits. So if they're growing and profitable, that's sort of an interesting reason why you think people might put this money in. So we'll see. I mean, the other thing they're talking a lot about is AI, like everyone does these days. Quite how that fits really into the vision, we'll have to see. But if to a degree, if they can, So the other thing I would say as well is a little bit of a something to be careful about is they're going to launch their token. So a lot of this stuff is incentivized. So at the moment, they're not giving away their token. They're giving away basically a sort of a locked version of their token that will convert to their token when the token goes live. So we've seen this, in the past so many times that you can drive a lot of audience into your product game if people are hoping that there's a token, basically free money coming, and people will even spend to get what they think will be more value in that token. So that's the one sort of thing I would sort of the cautionary point I would say at this stage, that they can, particularly with the audience they have, they can probably drive that growth for a period of time. As soon as the token comes out, that community, it's almost impossible to stop them selling. And then will they stay in that community if they've sort of had their payoff and the token price starts going down? So you're getting less and less over time, which is just the dynamic of all these things. So, but again, I would just say the people who invested are non-crypto people, which may be a bad sign that they don't understand how this market goes. But equally, they're sort of serious investors who you would have thought would have some inkling that that's what's going on.
Yeah, I think history has sort of shown that no, the answer is no. The question isn't, are they going to stay in the ecosystem when the token goes live? They're going to extract and they're going to leave. The question is, how do you keep them? Is anyone coming up with a model that actually incentivizes people not to dump and not to just extract and leave? And so far, that's the sort of big struggle. So yeah, let's move on. Overtake, the kind of the game item marketplace for Web 2 and Web 3 items, has launched on the Sui. We always funny how do you say this, Sui or Sui blockchain, the South Korean blockchain from Mythos Labs. How do you say it? Not the most relevant.
It's Sui. I think they say Sui, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. So what's Overtake?
Yeah, I just want to do this sort of briefly. We'll just say so that you're right. It's the Sui blockchain from Mythos Labs. They're American though. They basically came out of the Facebook sort of stuff. So, but Overtake are the South Korean company. So it's launched in beta. It's very early. There's not much functionality there. What's interesting here is Overtake is basically a very experienced team from South Korea who've been running these sort of Web 2 game marketplaces for getting on for a decade now. So they've been quite big in Korea because MMORPGs are quite big in Korea. So they've pretty much been focused on this sort of market. There's been two big marketplaces there, and the team who are doing Overtake have sort of been funded and have had experience in this. And obviously, if you're running a Web2 marketplaces, you're sort of a grey market. So the game developers whose games you're sort of selling stuff of can sue you. There is a sort of a grey market, so it's not illegal, but it can be difficult there. And also, there's loads of problems about how does it work when it's very small amounts of money. So that's typical internet sort of microtransaction thing. How do you deal with chargebacks? So basically, someone says I didn't get what I wanted, or someone's taken a hacked credit card and used it, and that those sort of things seem small, but they can just kill, because the margins on these marketplaces are tiny. So anything like that, any friction like that, can just kill the business straight away. So using blockchain, as we're seeing actually now in lots of the rise of stable coins and particularly stable coins, Stripe running its own blockchain with its stable coins, and and stable coins seems like the most boring thing in the world, but stable coins compared to transacting in all the different currencies used in the world and how long it takes to get from a bank to a bank, and all the people who take cuts along the way of that sort of transferring $100 from London to Nairobi, all that sort of stuff. So blockchains can really help on that. They don't fix all the problems; they create some new problems, of course, but it's just very frictionless. And so Overtake is interesting in the sense that I'm sure they do have this whole vision thing. They really believe in blockchain, blah blah blah. But they believe in it not because of some utopian sort of like sort of we hate governments and want to own this sort of internet money. They've been working on this product. They've been working in this field for 10 years, and they can just see blockchain sort of is a useful fix for that. And it is interesting because obviously just doing Web3 marketplaces, that's not interesting at all. But if you're mixing Web2 and Web3, items, then that is quite interesting. That you're having you're tokenizing stuff and tokenizing again real world asset blockchains and all that sort of stuff. Tokenizing Pokemon cards. That's been quite a big thing this year. So mashing that all up together, I think just sort of keeping your eye on it. The other thing I would just say, talking about token prices, so they launched their Take token on Sui a couple of months ago, and it's actually gone up, which is, I'm not saying that's not investment advice, but it's sort of interesting when so many tokens have gone down this year, and it's doubled in price. So, that's pure speculative. The South Korean market is quite crypto friendly. They do like South Korean projects, so I'm sure they've had a lot of support from South Korean exchanges. So it may just be, I'm not saying that's validating their vision, but it is interesting. And obviously, when they have their own money, so they can encourage people to buy and sell things, and you can get rewards, and you can stake the token, and all that sort of stuff. So, but just one worth certainly I'll keep my eye on it.
Good. Now, finally, then, I think we left last week on the note that Proof of Play CEO Amit Mayan had been on a podcast and sort of kind of apologized, I would say, for sort of the team not realizing how attached the community were to the Founder Pirates NFTs, and they shouldn't sort of have, if they knew now, if they would have done things differently, basically. We don't know much more, I don't think. Or do you know anything? I know it ended with a question: what's happening with Proof of Play? So
I know that. So there's been a massive update, and I would say that it's funny how you sort of said, they sort of misunderstood how attached people were to their Proof of Play pirates. What the community was attached to was all the money it had spent buying them, and then was offended they were only offered $50 per pirate. So I've taken a pretty hard line on this. I think there's a lot of little crybabies who were happy to I support Pirate Nation's the best thing since sliced bread because I'm going to make more money. There's one we do quote. I can't remember who it is. I would probably know. The guy who spent $200,000 buying these assets and now was annoyed that it was only worth $3,500. It's like, well, this is blockchain, dude. I mean, how do you expect this money to, appear from thin air? Well, of course, it's exactly what they expect with blockchain. So that's, I definitely think Proof of Play, as every blockchain game, retrospectively sees, unless you're very, very tight on your language all the time, which is impossible, people always read between what you're saying and think it's going to be amazing. So almost like Proof of Play got badmouthed because they were a serious team who'd done serious games in the past and had raised a lot of money from A16Z. that was the reason. You proper guys, why, you know, it was just stupid. It was just people crying over spilt milk. It's just like, you know, they were pretty clear why they weren't going ahead with this stuff. They were losing $150,000 a month, you know, and it hadn't worked out. And you know, I mean, it's just you know,
The
you sort of
problem
in
with a
despair.
lot of, the problem with a lot of Web3 communities is that they don't pull the brake at that stage.
Yeah,
They keep on
yeah,
going, hoping that somehow magically it's going to work out. But these guys are experienced, know exactly,
yeah.
you know, when it was time to pull the brake. Probably should have done
Well,
it
it's
before.
probably
Yeah.
they should have, as ever, should have done it earlier. The big problem they did have was when they launched the pirate token, then clearly at that stage they were all going to launch a proof of play token. So they had this point system. So that was clearly an overreach. And then now they've had to back all that down and say the only token we're going to have is pirate. So they've had to sort of rejig themselves there. But you know, you didn't hear anyone complaining at the time. You got some free tokens, and then you could stake them to get more tokens. I mean, you know, I was exactly the same, and that was the reason people didn't sell them at the time. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying they're blameless. But you know, I just kind of, you know, some people just have to grow up, and if you're spending $200,000 on an NFT collections, then you have to be prepared, you know, to lose all that. I mean, you know, don't be an idiot. Anyway, so they have sort of been conciliatory. So they did say in this long blog post on Twitter that you know, they're limited in terms of how many tokens they can give away because they only have a certain pool. You know, they can't magic tokens out of the air. They're not going to buy them off the open market. So that was the reason why you only got $50 per pirate, because that was what the pool was, and they had pools for other reward systems. So they've changed that a little bit now, and it's basically to placate the you know, the 10 people who, you know, who have been really hardcore players and probably spent, you know, too much money on that. And there's, yeah, anyway, we won't go into all that. Well, the interesting thing is, though, they do talk a bit more about sort of the future and what's going ahead. And as I say, a little bit, I mean, it's not like SANDcoin from that point of view, but it is interesting to talk because, you know, they basically said we were building, you know, all this infrastructure for Pirate Nation because we needed it, you know, but we're an infrastructure company. That was always the sort of thing. And I think they got a bit over their skis on how good they thought Pirate Nation was. Where at one point they just thought it was a bit of a throwaway game, and then everyone got very attached to it, and they thought it was going to be a really, you know, mass market game, and it wasn't. So now they're an infrastructure company who are doing little experiments, and they're very much talking about, you know, I mean, like everyone would do, but they're talking about, you know, we have all this infrastructure that anyone can plug into. We have, you know, we're building, you know, these sort of have these open APIs. We're having this sort of stable coin based payment system. We're having these some DeFi features in there as well. And the whole point is that anyone can use it. And that was probably where they went wrong, is they got too focused on Pirate Nation as a game, spent too much time on that, didn't build enough community around remixing that and having, like when we first spoke to Amit, having, like, you know, zombies, you know, a zombie version of it, or ninjas or something like that. They should have just, like, you know, sort of cranked, you know, not got too bound up in one game, because that wasn't the hill they were going to die on. They were going to die on a different hill, to use my favorite analogy. So, but the other interesting things they sort of said in passing is they're working on a mobile game at the moment. And they, like everyone would say, they think this is really good. So I don't know. I imagine it's totally different from Pirate Nation, because they've said the pirate NFTs are sort of just aesthetic now; they're dead in terms of value. So there's a new mobile game coming out that uses their infrastructure. They want to get people really into that. And they also said that Pirate Nation still does live on. So there is what they call I think it's proof of play arcade on Abstract. So people love Abstract at the moment, because if you're playing on Abstract, you're getting the Abstract XP points, and that people, you know, obviously expecting the Abstract token to drop and then to get loads of free money again. So they said they rate. I can't remember. What was it? Let me actually find it here. Sorry, I did actually pull this out.
Exactly what you said. Sorry, once you find that, it's
Yeah.
interesting with what you're saying about sort of the struggle of communication, because when they did this big funding round, raised 33 million or so, it was communicated as if they had raised this for Pirate Nation. It wasn't really communicated. They had raised this for infrastructure mainly. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons people also got bullish on the
Mm,
game rather than the team and the infrastructure. And
yeah.
maybe we're sort of partly to blame there, because that's how we would have reported it. Oh, it's this game coming out. We didn't sort of, oh, it's this infrastructure that takes 10 years to build and might support loads of different games. And, you
Mm,
know,
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I don't know. I think the first interview I had with Amit, he was quite sort of keen, he quite was saying, there's these other games which could be built, and that's what they're looking for, and they could have let more into that. Anyway, so just say, so on Proof of Play Arcade, this thing on Abstract, where they basically have taken some of the little modes from Pirate Nation, and you basically get a few free goes a day, but if you want to have a lot of goes, you spend money in that. And he said, we've generated $500,000 of revenue in the last 2 months. So you can sort of see they were in a situation where they had a big sort of game. It wasn't being played by many players. A few of the top players were just getting all the rewards, and it was costing them $150,000 a month to run the infrastructure for not many players. They've got rid of all that, and now they've basically taken the good bit, the fun bits of that game, the sort of pirate the ship versus ship stuff. They put it into a little arcade, and they made you pay for your coin op, put your coins in, and they've made $500,000, in 2 months. So you can just see, which one should they not have done this one where they saved money and started making money? It's sort of in some ways ridiculous. So anyway, I mean, I've always been quite bullish on them, and I think they got they raised a lot of money, and in any sort of technology situation, often the first thing you try and do doesn't work for various reasons, and you have to pivot or whatever you do. And I think I'm not saying that this infrastructure thing is going to play out at all, but now at least we know that's what they're trying to do. They've got a new game coming out. The only token is going to be the pirate token. None of the NFTs have any value now from Proof of Play, at least. They may launch other NFTs, probably not because of all the fuss with this one. But now everything, the focus is on this pirate token, all-time low. So no one should be sort of surprised if it keeps going down. But at least you sort of have a clean playing field now, where this is the battlefield they're operating on. I mean, I obviously wish them all the best. And I after confessing that I burnt my pirate and had to buy another one, I went and bought another one this week. So I've got 2 pirates now. It's becoming a terrible thing.
Good. Yeah, don't buy anymore.
No more.
Right. So thank you very much for tuning in, listening, and we'll see you all next week. Bye bye.